So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the best practices of the business office. My name is Mary Catherine Duffy, and I am the Director of Professional Development here at SAES, and we are honored to have each participant on here. I'm joined today by Becky Reimer, who is the business manager at St. James Episcopal School in Dallas. I met Becky about 2 years ago on an SAES on-site visit and realized that she was going to be a great person to teach us about what a business office should look like. So Becky, thank you for being a part of this and thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you, Mary Catherine, and welcome to everybody. I'm so glad everybody's here this Friday morning. I hope you guys have had a good week. Before I flip to my presentation, I just want to give you a little bit of more background on what my job is and what our school is like so that you can kind of place it into how your school functions.
Yeah, and Becky, we're going to make sure, before we do that, let's make sure one quick thing. I want to make sure that you guys know that we want you to be engaged today. And we're going to engage you in a couple of ways. We're going to engage you either you can put questions in the Q&A box. I'll be monitoring that. And or you can put questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring that as well as Becky goes through her presentation. We've got some poll questions we want you to participate in. And then we just want you to know that this will be accessible for the next 30 days. And you will be getting this recording and the slide deck that Becky's done, because so you don't have to take notes, right, Becky? You're going to have plenty of information. So let's make sure real quick while you're putting up your screen that people know how to use the chat feature. So go ahead and put your name in the chat to make sure that we know you're there. And then if you want to do it in the Q&A box as well, that'll tell us that you know how to use that as well. So real quickly, we'll do that and then we can get started. Welcome. Yeah, we got lots of people here today. Good. Okay, Becky, go ahead and get started.
Okay, so like Mary Catherine said, I'm Becky. I work at St. James Episcopal School here in Dallas. We are a early childhood Montessori program, so we're kind of unique in that we're a Montessori Christian program here in the middle of the heart of Dallas. We serve children ages 18 months through kindergarten. And we have about 180 students. So I would consider, I guess, that we're on the smaller side of schools. Our business office is fairly small. Myself, and I would say the head of school participates in the business office obviously, and then we have an administrator that also helps us in the business office. So before we launch too far, into the presentation, I'd like to get an idea of the people on the call. What is your role at the school? Just so that we can kind of have an idea where to gear this presentation to.
Yeah, so we're going to add this, we're going to launch a poll here and we're going to ask you to answer, what is your role at the school? Are you a business manager? Are you a head of school, treasurer? What's your job? Got about 11 people on the call, so we're going to wait just a few minutes. We've got about half the people who have answered. If you're a head of school, you could obviously say all of those things. All right, we're going to wrap it up in just a few seconds and share the results. All right, let's see here. Becky, we have 5 out of the 8 are business managers. We got a couple of heads of schools and we've got an other. So maybe that's a board member or so pretty much kind of our business managers and our heads. That's boots on the ground, right?
Yep, that's perfect. Okay, so let's go ahead and launch on into this. And like Mary Catherine said, I'm honored to be here presenting to you guys, but ask any questions at any point in the chat and share any comments that you have. I think that since we have a great group, a smaller group here, that we can all learn from each other. So don't hesitate if you do something great at your school that you want to throw out there.
Yes, absolutely.
I think it's an awesome way to learn from everybody. So let's go ahead and get started. Oops, why won't my thing? Okay. I might be a little bit biased, and I hope that you guys are too on the call, but I think that the business office is obviously a critical part of a successful school. I think an efficient and effective business office can determine the success of your school and for you being able to promote your mission and your strategic initiatives for your operation. The business office obviously is a vital resource to both the head of school and the board. I kind of like to look at the business office as your behind the scenes, boots on the ground, getting the work done behind the scenes so that you can focus on your education and your mission. I kind of look at it as two different silos within the school. You've got the business silo and you've got the education silo. And if the business office can run smoothly and have the business side of the school functioning and being successful, then the head of school and the board and everyone can focus on the education and delivering to your family the product that you want your family to receive. Because of this, we are partners in advancing the school and ensuring that you do provide your families with your mission appropriate product.
You know, Becky, I think what you just said is really important. And I think the opposite is true, that if your business office is not operating properly, not only is it not supportive of the mission, but it's hindering the mission. Would you agree with that?
100%. That was going to be my next comment.
Ah, well, there you go.
So awesome. I was going to play into this. You know, the business office has a lot of responsibilities. I think a lot of things get tossed into the business office that may not fit other places. So everything just goes into the business office's responsibilities. So you have to make sure that your business office is properly staffed and that they can handle those responsibilities and all those tasks. Because as Mary Catherine said, if your business office is struggling, your families are going to know it one way or another, whether because you cannot deliver the education and the curriculum that you want, or they're just not getting the customer service back behind the scenes that you want them to get on a day-to-day basis. So let's kind of take a look at some of the tasks that might fall under the business office. As I said, it can be a huge realm. Everything kind of gets dumped into the business office. So as you see, this is a pretty extensive list. I would say here at St. James, since we are on the smaller side, that on the day-to-day, we probably focus mostly on human resources, facilities management, budgeting, financial analysis, and account compliance. The other stuff we touch on, you know, throughout the year, but I would say on a day-to-day basis, that's kind of where we focus our time. And I figure if we can manage that and take that off the plate of the head of school or work with the head of school as a partner in that, then they can focus on engaging with our families, making sure that our missions is where it needs to be and that the education product that we're delivering is what we want it to be. So I'd like to take another quick poll here and just let us know, how many employees do you have or consider that you have in your business office? Are you large? Are you small?
How many employees do you have in your business office? You know, this is one of the things that I always, having come from a school that was small, I would always say to people like I had a business officer and a secretary when I started at St. Albans, and we had 300 kids.
Oh, geez.
And I didn't know that wasn't the way everybody did it. Isn't that funny? So, you know, I always say to my friends who are in bigger schools, try doing it with one person and see how it works. And then tell me about it. Okay, we're going to give you just a few more seconds to answer. Let's see what we got here. All right, share results. Can y'all see that? We've got 50% have one person, and then 50% have two or three. No one has more than three, which tells us we're working with some people with some smaller schools. We can appreciate that, right, Becky?
Yes, we can. And that means that all you guys are handling a lot of stuff, and day to day, your job changes depending upon what's happening on that day. I know that this week has been kind of one of those weeks at our school. So
yeah.
Okay, so then let's look at the challenges of what a business office, what you guys might be encountering. As we just discussed, our offices aren't large, and they aren't even in larger schools. So that's something that you have to manage, to make sure that the workload and the resources are there to support your business office with your limited resources. Also, in most schools, the head of school may have only limited financial or business experience or background. I would assume that most heads of school kind of grow up through the education side of the business or the education silo. But yet the Board of Trustees and the vestry and even the parents hold the head of school to a standard, and they have to run the school as a business. So as a business officer, you have to be that partner and assist your head of school and the board in managing through that. Once again, also, some boards, most boards may lack the financial management training also. And even if they do have financial management training, they may not have the training in school-specific financials. I am very fortunate in the past couple of years, our board has been financially heavy, and I get a lot of great knowledge from these people, but they're in the corporate world. So they're still not familiar with how you run a school, the uniqueness of a school, and the financials of a nonprofit, because there are different ways that you approach that than running a for-profit business. So those are just some of the challenges that face our schools, our business offices today.
Yeah, and I think as you're going to the next slide, the comment I would make about that is just that as board members, and we said this in the leadership and governance. I don't think this can be said enough. We said it in the leadership and governance webinar on the business side to our board members. We don't have any board members on this call, I don't think, but the thing about it is that board members often do view the financial management of the school from a corporate perspective. And while it is a business, it's very unique. It's nonprofit, accounting is different. Nonprofits operate differently. And that's been a challenge, I think, for some of our heads to get board members to see that. And I think that oftentimes falls to the business manager of a school to educate board members about the unique business structure. Would you agree with that?
I would agree. And I would also agree and throw in there that in a corporate world, decisions can be made based on profit and loss. And I think in a school that there's a lot more soft analysis that goes around a financial decision than you would in a corporate world. So that's
much more nuanced.
Yeah. So let's take a look at, as we've been talking, there's a lot of things we could discuss about business offices today, but we're going to focus primarily on what we consider the best operating practices, budgeting, accounting compliance, and financial analysis, which are all such light topics for a Friday morning.
Oh, yes, aren't they?
That's okay. We'll get all the hard work done this morning and we can have light afternoons, or I hope that for everybody. So let's first take a look at best operating practices or things to consider for your school. And first, we'd like to focus on your legal entity and your relationship between the parish and the school. As most of us probably have a very close relationship with our parish, we probably depend upon our parish a lot, and we're structured so that we support each other. But we also need to make sure that the school stands alone. You need to incorporate your school as a separate legal entity and make sure that you have clear lines of authority between the school and the church. You need to respect that the vestry is the steward of the parish, but the school board is the steward of the school. Even though the school board, ultimately reports up to the vestry, it is the job of the school board to oversee the school, not the vestry. On that note, you need to make sure that your head of school reports to the school board, is hired, evaluated, and by the school board, not the vestry, but that the head of school is responsible for the operation of the school. I know specifically in the past couple of years, we've had some moments where you have board members, especially if their parents kind of want to get involved in the day-to-day operation of the school, and they have great ideas. But that needs to remain with the head of school. They need to be responsible for the day-to-day operation, and the board needs to be focused more on strategic direction and risk management for the school. You need to ensure that your faculty and administration report to your head of school. They shouldn't be reporting up to the rector or reporting to the board or anywhere, something different like that. So that's kind of it in a legal nutshell. As far as financial structure goes, you need to make sure that your school stands alone from your church. The school should have separate books. They should have separate accounting systems. They should have a separate bookkeeper and manager. I know in smaller situations, you might be tempted to have a bookkeeper who shares, does split time between the church and the school, which on the surface probably sounds great, can save you both some money. But you have to have an advocate for the school and you need an advocate for the church.
Yeah.
If somebody's wearing both heads, then somewhere along the line, they're going to be split down the middle and not quite sure which side that they need to land on. So
yeah, and to these operating practices, what we want to acknowledge is that, as the business manager, you don't necessarily have the authority to do any of this alone. And as a head of school, and some of this feels like it's out of your purview, but what I would argue is that your knowledge of knowing this helps everyone. So if you know that the school should be probably be separated from the church. Now, I will tell you, there are some dioceses that don't allow that. And so we acknowledge at SAES that there are some dioceses that don't allow the school and the church to be separated as a legal entity. It is what it is. These are best practices. The idea around that you were just talking about a person doing the books for both the church and the school in smaller communities, that is often the case. I can live with that if the books are separate, but I think, Becky, that what you just said is critical for people to think about, and that is that at some point there's going to be some friction around the money, because that always happens. And if you've got one person in charge of both sets of books, that puts that person in a really unique and difficult position. So can you do it if their books are separated? Yes. Should you do it? Is it best practice? Probably not, because of that ultimate conflict of interest, I guess is what I would call it. So I just want to acknowledge that many of the practices here, the business manager can't do anything about these, but you should at least know that they're best practice, right?
Right. Totally agree. And like Mary Catherine said, there's situations where it's not best for your school or church to do it this way, but just something to keep in mind that, if you do choose to share a bookkeeper or business manager, that you put some sort of process in place where you don't put that individual in the position where they kind of get caught in the middle between two warring parties, between mom and dad fighting at the home.
Not that would ever happen, would it?
No, it's never happened here. All right, so let's talk about that business manager position for a little bit. It is important that or the bookkeeper position is filled with somebody who has some accounting or financial background. Just because somebody was the treasurer of the little PTO down the street doesn't necessarily mean that that's the person you want in this position. As we said at the very beginning, the business manager's role really is to partner with the head of school to maintain, to protect, to educate on financial situations within the school. And so you want somebody who can do that can be the partner with your head of school and give them that knowledge and competence that they need in that position. It may be tempted. I know that, if you're going to go hire somebody, that's not a cheap position, but I firmly believe in the long run that will pay for itself over and over again if you use that position correctly and wisely. Also make sure that you have transparent financial dealings between the school and parish once again. For example, I know that SAES recommends, and that we haven't, that you have shared resource agreements between the parties. Here at St. James, we have a shared space agreement. We have a shared technology agreement, and we used to have a shared personnel agreement because we shared a chaplain. It's rare that we pull those agreements out because we do have a close relationship with the church, but in times where you're trying to figure out who's supposed to do what and who's supposed to pay for what, it's a great resource to begin the discussions and have that type of back and forth between the school and the parish. Also, be careful that you prohibit or limit your financial conflicts of interest between your board members and your vestry members. I know in a small school that this can probably get a little bit tricky, just in that you might have board members who can provide a very valuable service to the school, whether they have a marketing company or an advertising company, or they run a contractor business and they'll build your new bathroom for your classroom. But you have to be real careful that, you know, as you head down that path, that you make sure that you don't have a conflict of interest. And if you choose to go that way, that you set it up so that person is no longer in a decision-making capacity for the school or the church, and that they're doing everything at arm's length.
Yeah, you know, we had that situation. We had a board chair, vice president of our board we were in a capital campaign and he was the architect. And as we began to get closer and closer to realizing that we were going to be doing that, he resigned because I said, I would rather have you be the architect and help us get through the building process and then to have you not be the architect and be on the board. And so that's what he did. And so I think that's great. That's great advice.
And you know, I think it's okay to use them as a vendor because they obviously love your school and they support your school.
Mm-hmm.
Just do it in the right way so that you don't have any sort of outward, what am I trying to say?
Well, it just needs to look arm's length. It needs to look, it needs to just not look shady. So
it needs to not smell.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's move on to budgeting, which is everybody's favorite topic. But actually, this is perfect timing to kind of launch into this for a little bit. This is kind of the time of year where we should have put our budgets for this year to bed, have them approved, and kind of moving forward and starting analyzing on that. But we should also be starting to focus on next year's budget. So let's go ahead.
Becky, I think are you ready for this poll, the next poll?
Sure, yeah.
We're going to do another poll. And while we do it, I was going to comment, has your budget been finalized and approved by the board? We'll launch it up. I think people are often surprised when we say, start your budgeting process for the next year in September. I think often that, and I think it's because they don't realize that it's just it's a lot of work, and we want to start that process early so that we can get to a place, because it's going to take some time to get to that budget, right? Would you agree with that?
I would 100% agree with that.
But I always have people that are like, really? I just started the school year. But for sure, you got to get going.
I just finished my other budget.
That's right. So we're going to give you about 4 more seconds, and then we're going to end the poll. Has your budget been finalized and approved by the board? Let's see what people say. 71% said yes, 29% said no.
You guys are awesome.
Well done.
That is well done. That's great. Okay, so let's go on and talk a little bit about the budget. As Mary Catherine said, do you focus on budgeting forward? The answer to that is yes. We do think that you need to start looking at now for your budget for next year. This will assist you in planning for your admissions, planning for your teachers' contracts, planning to make sure that you've included expenses that are mission appropriate, making sure that you've incorporated all your strategic initiatives. If you update a 5-year financial forecast, then you can make sure that you're incorporating in there the cost and the expenses to implement any of those strategic initiatives that are coming up in the next school year. And as the second question asked, what will it take to deliver the school's mission? This gives you time to really evaluate it. Make sure that the expenses that you're including are really mission appropriate. And if they're not, look at why they're in there then and what you can do about that. If you wait until the last minute and you're not looking forward, then you're kind of in a crunch and you don't have the leisure to really look at if what you're spending is where you should be spending it. Who should be involved in the budgeting process? I do think that's dependent upon the size of the school, but I think you should involve as many people as you can, whether it be your department heads, your teachers, obviously your head of school, your business manager. It shouldn't all fall to the head of school or to the business manager. You need to have your treasurer, your finance committee, and your board all involved in the budgeting process.
So Becky, let me ask you a question. When you begin it now, though, who is involved in the very first steps of setting the budget? Who do y'all like? Do you just begin at first kind of creating, gathering data between the head of school and the business manager? Is that how y'all start?
I would say here at St. James, we do that. We use this year's budget as a launching ground. Okay, here's where we are today. Here's what we didn't get to do this year. Here's where we want to kind of wish list and think about what we want to do next year. if we had a perfect world, what would we change of our situation right now?
Yeah.
And then I think the next step would be to look at your constituents, whether it's your teachers or your, facilities department head or whoever, and talk to them and say, okay, what's going on this year that's not working for you? You didn't like how the
Right.
budget ended up. How can we potentially look at it for next year?
So we're asking a lot of questions at this time of the process. We're asking questions about, and I like what you just said about what would you like to be able to do? I don't think that we do enough of that. I think when you create a budget, this is not going to go over well with some of my frugal friends. Okay. But I think when you are creating a budget right now, that you're asking questions, what do I want to do? You're dreaming some, right? You're not just going, what can we afford? And I'm not saying that you shouldn't ask that question at some point. I definitely think you should, but I think that you cannot just say, what can we afford? I think you have to say, what do we want to do? Like, what is the mission asking us to do? What are we missing? And that way, if nothing else, sometimes that spurs you to be more creative and go, wow, we can do that. So if that's me being an Enneagram 7 dreamer, I know, but if you say, let's dream and then cut back, then you have a better chance of being creative than if you just go, well, this is all we can afford. Does that make sense? Does that make you cringe as a business manager? I'm sure it does.
Oh, no, I'm just
That's
kidding.
okay.
No, I think actually you're right, because I think if you say only what you can afford, then you run the risk of always just doing the same thing.
Right.
And I think if you wish and you dream, then you might go, you know what, that is really important to me, and I'm willing to give up this thing that I've always spent money on.
100%.
It's not getting me where I want to be.
Yeah. So I think that I like the asking questions during this part of the budgeting process is important.
Yep. The process of who should approve the budget. I firmly believe that everybody who's involved in the creation of the budget needs to be involved in approving the budget. I'm not saying they get final approval. Your teachers aren't going to have final approval. The board is going to have final approval.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that they need to feel like they had some sort of approval in what actually finally ended up in the budget for them. So I say your approval process goes from your lowest person up through the business manager to the head of school, treasurer, finance committee, and board. Who is responsible for adhering to the budget? I kind of found this a trick question, but I'm gonna give my honest answer here. I think that the head of school, and sorry, you head of schools, but the head of schools, the CEO of the school, is, I guess, ultimately responsible for the day-to-day adhering to the budget. But I firmly believe that everybody who is involved in the process of creating the budget is responsible for adhering to the budget. And I think that if you have the process in place to review your financials on a regular basis, then that responsibility is shared between the people who approve the budget. So on a monthly basis, if you look at your budget to variance, your budget to actual expense variances with your department heads, your head of school, your treasurer, your finance committee, and your board, then everybody's responsible for making sure that the school stays on budget. And if you're not, it's a joint decision as to why you're not and the actions you're going to take because those budget variances are there.
Yeah, I think, and to translate that to like a small school where you don't have division heads or you don't have, hey, that's okay. But the way you can kind of do that with the adhering to the budget on a small school is that you can make little policy things in place, like, hey, you can't spend money and expect to be reimbursed without a receipt.
Yeah.
Because we're gonna, and I know thank you. You're welcome to all the business managers of the world, but that's something that applies not just to the teachers, but to the head of school. I was the worst in the beginning about, my business manager would say, do you have a receipt for this? And I'd be like, oh gosh. And I would be pulling out receipts, but you learn very quickly how to do that. And so I think that even in a small school, that's a simple way that we're adhering to the budget, is that we're not going out and buying a bunch of Play-Doh that, and then going, oh, can you reimburse me, when that really was never in the budget. So
Right.
yeah, I think, and that's true for the head of school, all the way down to, the teachers, and even in the board, the board can't just decide, hey, we're going to start spending money on marketing that we don't have. So I think that's great.
And what happens when the budget isn't met? As we just discussed, if you've got the processes and reviews in place, that one should never be a surprise. And there should be an action plan as you're going forward as to what you're going to do because this isn't met. But I also think it's critical to stop here and talk about that if you don't have, and if you do have, that you continue to evaluate it, but make sure that your school has a contingency reserve. There are going to be those times where you have a little blip and it wasn't something you could plan for, but having that contingency reserve that the finance committee helps you manage and the board of trustees reviews with you, it gives you the cushion so that you can weather any budget mishaps that you might have during the school year.
And that's different than what we're talking about in reserves. That's not really, we're not really talking about reserves in that case. We're talking about maybe padding areas that you're a little bit unsure of, like maybe utilities, you're pretty sure it's going to be 50,000 a year, but maybe we make it 55 or 56 just in case.
Correct.
Is that what you're
Correct.
talking about? Okay.
I am talking about that, but I also am talking about having a cash reserve so that
so if your air conditioning goes out and it's a $10,000
that you were
that you were prepared for.
Yes.
So both and that's right.
Yep. Okay. Now we'll move on to accounting compliance, or what we talk about more of, making sure that your books are accurate and in order for the school. So we're just going to walk down through here some like internal controls or procedures to think about or have in place that can make sure that you kind of have tight control over what's going on within your financial world. First of all, make sure you register all cash, currency, and check as soon as it arrives. I don't know, depending upon your school, if you're actually receiving any cash these days. I know that we use fax management, and a lot of schools probably do, where the chunk of your money never really even comes into the school. But I'm sure you're still collecting some cash for, t-shirt fees or lunch fees or whatever you're doing. I would add a caveat here that if you can, you might not be able to because of the size of your school, but the person who registers the cash should not be the person who reconciles the bank account. So if you can separate those responsibilities, it's a great internal control to have there.
Yeah. And Becky, I just want to say something about that, because we say this every single time, and this is going to be true for all of these accounting practices, these internal controls. We recognize that oftentimes there's somebody, if you're a one, and this is true in this call, if you've got one business manager, it's difficult. And because what's difficult is that the business manager oftentimes has access to very confidential information, whether it's a donor's information, how much they gave, or people who are on scholarships or whatever. And so when you are trying to divide duties like that, it's hard to find a way to do that and to not worry about the breach of confidentiality. And I think it's also hard to, when let's say you have one business person, and you said it in the beginning of this webinar about you want to have people in the business office that are competent. So if I have a business officer and then I'm trying to find somebody to help kind of divide those duties, but I don't really know, none of my people are business people. I can't just say to the secretary who doesn't have any experience, hey, reconcile this bank statement. So we recognize at SAES that some of this is challenging. Sometimes this kind of internal control is challenging. And so I don't want people to go, oh, well, that's the only way to do it, and I can't do it, or well, I have to hire somebody. That's not what we're saying, but there are, we encourage you to be creative. Maybe the treasurer is helping. Maybe the board treasurer is helping do some of that work, right? Or maybe there's somebody else on the board that isn't a treasurer, but is a person that could once a month come in and help reconcile bank statements. I mean, I don't know, but that's a challenge we run into with some of our smaller schools.
It is, and I agree, Mary Catherine, that it is a huge challenge. I do think that there are some things that you can do just trying to protect yourself. You know, if you take in cash, have the person who, you know, the family that gave it to you, give them a receipt and have them
Yeah.
sign the receipt so that you have a logbook. Just
Right.
not so much that we perceive that anything's going wrong in your organization, but just to protect yourself. You wouldn't ever want to be accused of doing something you didn't do just because the controls weren't there. Make sure that you maintain a comprehensive register of physical assets. You should probably do an inventory of those assets on a regular basis. Make sure you do reconcile your monthly bank account statements promptly on a monthly basis. I certainly like to make sure that the monthly bank account statements are reconciled before I put together the financial statements. One, it validates that I know exactly what's going on with our cash position before I meet with the finance committee. And it also ensures that my expense statements are correct, you know, that I've got everything recorded accurately. On that line, you need to have somebody review on a monthly basis the ACH payments out of your account. We state here the head of school or treasurer.
Mhm.
At St. James, we've selected the treasurer because the head of school does have access to our bank accounts. She doesn't ever do anything in the bank accounts, but she does have access. So it would be kind of a conflict for her to actually review the ACH payments. Once again, reconcile and review your monthly credit card statements and try to get all those receipts from those from the people.
All those rogue head of school.
Yeah. Once again, I definitely would recommend that you do this before you put together your monthly financial statements, because it ensures that you have all the expenses accounted for that month. And require two-party signatures on your checks over a certain amount, that if that amount was lost, it would cause significant pain. Here at St. James, we've set that amount at $2,500. But we also have a policy that we have to get two-party signatures or approval of any significant out-of-budget expenditure. Now, you know, if the head of school is going to go spend $100 on crayons, we're not going to get Treasury approval of that. But if all of a sudden we need to spend $3,000 to get the trees trimmed or whatever it may be, we do require two signatures on those checks just to ensure that everybody's aware of the significant expenditure.
Yeah, and one of the things that I would offer here too is that a lot of these practices and procedures are things that should be financial policies that the board creates. And so if your board does not have a kind of a whole set of financial policies about how things are going to be handled, they should. And that's something that if you're the business manager on this call, and you should probably talk to the head of school and say, hey, we don't have any financial policies in place that are written, and it's not the job of the business manager to write policies for themselves, and it's not the job of the head of school to do that. It's the job of the board to say, here is the policy for how we are going to handle our financial office. That's a board-driven policy, a board-driven activity. And so I would encourage our heads to if they don't have this, to get with their boards and start those policies. It's easy to find. You can call other schools, call around. I'm sure Becky has some great examples of policies about all kinds of things. And that's a board activity.
I would gladly share ours. It is something we focused on 5 or 6 years ago because we did want to have it documented. And it's something that our finance committee, if not on an annual basis, we certainly look at it every other year just to make sure we're still okay with.
And it's a standard. It's an SAES standard for accredited schools that you have those financial policies in place.
Yeah. And it's great to say, hey, look, here's where it's written.
Yeah, absolutely. Gives you some backup especially as the business manager.
Make sure you back up your accounting files on a regular basis. Some of us might be on web-based systems, so this isn't as much of an issue, but if you certainly have a standalone system, whether it's QuickBooks on your PC, make sure that you're backing it up nightly or weekly. I would also add that if you are backing it up and you're backing it up to your PC, make sure that your PC is backed up on a regular basis. It would be a horrible day if you came in and couldn't pull up all your financial information. Watch for fictitious vendors. This is probably more of an issue in bigger schools. I think, we're a smaller school, and it appears that some of you guys are too. I sit in the middle of everything, so I hear more than I probably should and get involved in more than my head of school probably wants me to be. So that isn't as much probably as an issue for us because I know what should be coming down the pipe for us. But if you're a bigger school, that's something to definitely watch, is who you're paying and what you're paying them for. Require approval by the head of school for payments over a defined amount. Like I said, we're a smallest school. The head of school signs all the checks, so she's aware of all the payments that go out the door. But we do have a policy in place that, as Mary Catherine said before, a teacher or someone cannot go spend $1,000 and then bring their receipt in and say, oh, by the way, I spent $1,000. If they're going to
Right.
if they're going to spend over a certain amount, for us, it's $100. They have to get prior approval, or we won't, or we'll think about not reimbursing it for them. Make sure that you create and keep a paid vendor file with invoices and check stubs. This will come in handy when you do your audit and review. It also comes in handy next year when somebody says, hey, who did we use for this and how much did we pay them? Or you get a quote next year for the same service and you go, hey, that doesn't sound right. I think they upped it by 100% or whatever. You're welcome to do it either by vendor or do it by check number, whatever method you want to come up with. It needs to be something that you can easily go and track your invoices and check stubs. Make sure you remit all your payroll taxes on time. You don't want to incur penalties or anything just because you're delinquent in that. As we mentioned before, make sure you establish a process for shared costs and shared facilities between the church and the school. Make sure those are updated annually and that you have I would say, have a close relationship with your treasurer or the bookkeeper at the church or whichever side you're on, because it'll just help facilitate that. And make sure that you create controls and procedures that mirror the schools within your parent organizations. Make sure that the PTO and the Booster Club and the Parent Club all have their own set of operating best procedures, so that there's never any question about the funds that are flowing through those organizations into the school.
Yeah, and those should not be separate. Those should not be separate accounts. Those should be under the umbrella of the school, right? That's an SAES standard as well, is that PTO and Parent Club, that's not to say that they shouldn't be separate within the business manager's accounting, but they shouldn't have their own checking account and have full control over it. And that's a real issue sometimes with some of our smaller schools where the PTO or the Booster Club or whatever has their own checking account and the parents are in charge of it. And then they come in and say, well, we raised $10,000 and we want to put a pool in the middle of the playground, and you don't have any control because you didn't raise it. It's our money. Well, that's bad practice. It's okay for them to have a separate, like, we know that the sixth graders are raising money for their trip, but it should all be funneled through the school and right back out. So,
yep. Okay. And just as a warning, a caution here, if anything doesn't feel right, look right, seem right, take the time to figure it out. There's nothing worse than saying, that doesn't seem right, but I'm just going to let it go because I don't feel like dealing with it now. And we have 1,000 things on our plate, because it will come back and it'll be a bigger problem for you in the end. So,
yeah, this is a Rick Kelloggism. If something smells fishy, it probably is.
And I agree. So, okay, now let's talk about your regular financial review. This is actually my favorite thing. This is the heart of what I love about my job and what we do. Make sure that you establish a set routine for reviewing each month's operating results to budget. Make sure that you review it with the head of school, or if you're the head of school, that you review it with your business manager. Make sure that you review it with your finance committee and you review it with your board. There should never be any surprises. I would also add in there on a not necessarily a monthly basis, but definitely a quarterly basis, make sure that you review a forecast. It's one thing to look at your monthly operating results against the budget, but you need to let your finance committee, your head and your board know, well, what does that mean on a full year outlook? So this month we met budget, great, but does that mean that that's the way we're going to be for the rest of the school year? Or, if 1 month you had a hit with an expense, that doesn't mean that you're going to be out of budget for the full year. So try to look at what your full year school year is going to look like, because then you can manage manage your school to that expectation.
Right.
And make sure that you do an annual review or audit by an independent accounting firm. I believe that SAES requires that you do an audit every year if you have $1 million or more in revenue.
That's correct.
This is nobody's favorite, but we are going to say, why would you do that?
Now, if you are under $1 million, you can do audit review.
Right.
So
we are actually now big enough that we have to do an audit each year. And it's a good thing to do. As it says here, bookkeeping and accounting is complicated. It's time sensitive. Money is tight. We all get busy and mistakes get made. And unfortunately, so does fraud. So this is an opportunity to just stop and take a look and make sure everything's going okay. Mistakes and fraud can cost your school a lot, if not not only in cost, but also your reputation and how it looks to your family. So you want to make sure that you're not, that you're ensuring that everything is being done properly. As we discussed, SAES requires it for accreditation, and it's crucial protection for yourself, for the head of school, for the board, for the vestry. And I would also add one in there. We have a great auditing firm. I use them as a sounding board. How should I handle this? How should I treat this? Last year with all the PPP loans and everything going on in there, tell me how you recommend. And what was it, 2 or 3 years ago, they changed nonprofit accounting, and they were a great resource for, how we start presenting our financials that way. So it doesn't always have to be a painful relationship with your auditor.
right. And then it can also help, an audit can also help with projections. It can help you look at your past and help you kind of create, what are we continually seeing as an issue, or where do we need to make some changes based on what we've been seeing over the past few years? So I think it can help with projection into the future as well.
Yeah. And it's also, if you hire an outside accountant their offices specialize in nonprofit accounting, they can give you some insight into how other people do things. And I think that that's a great resource also. And last but not least,
Becky, real quick about the question about the accounting, about the review and the audit. Do you guys present your audit to your full board?
We do. And
do you require them to come, or do you just say, we're going to present the audit to the finance committee, we encourage you to come?
We don't require it. We make it accessible. If anybody wants to come look at the audited report, they're more than welcome to. But it's more of a finance committee review.
Okay.
But we do require that the board approve the financials from the end of the school year. Yeah. So in essence, they're approving,
right,
and make them aware if there was any audit changes or not. On that note, sorry, I'm just going to add one more thing. Make sure you do your audit on a timely basis. I know that the last thing we want to do is go through an audit in the summer because we kind of want that to be a little bit of downtime. But there's nothing worse, my opinion is, there's nothing worse than being in the middle of the next school year trying to address questions from the last school year. So I would just recommend you bite the bullet and get it done quickly. Last, make sure that you provide your business office with the training and tools that they need to do their job correctly, whether that's in nonprofit accounting, whether it's in any new legal issues they're coming up with schools, maybe just, I know that SAES does a great job of these webinars and other things. ISM does a great job in offering some business manager summer programs. I do think in a school that, we want to make sure that the teachers always get the professional development that they need, but I also think that we need to ensure that the business office has the professional development they need, if for no other reason, just to build a network, get ideas, bounce ideas, understand how everybody does things, because we get in our own little bubbles, and it's nice to see what the outside world is doing sometimes.
Yeah.
Is there any questions, comments?
You guys, if you have questions, let's put them in the Q&A or the chat. I'm watching them both. But one of the things that kind of just comes to mind about that, back to that professional development question, is just around That's not just true for business managers. That's true for heads of school. You know, we talk all the time about the head of school. Most of our heads come into their job not as business people. I was just talking to a head of school earlier this morning, and he happens to be a business person, having come into the education arena later in life. But many of our school heads were educators. They started as teachers. They got their administrative certificate or their master's, then they got into administration. If you came out of public school, you didn't get that training because you're not required to be the CEO of your school. But in an independent school like our schools, you are required to do that. You are building the budget. It's not given to you. So many of our people need that kind of training that's specialized. Do they need to be accountants? No, they don't have to be accountants, but they do have to be trained well to understand what they're reading and what they're listening to, and to be able to comment on budgeting and participate in all that. So I would encourage anyone watching this, if they are board members or if they're school heads, to get out there and have the funds available, like Becky said, for our school heads and our business managers to get the training they need to be good at their job. Because you're right, Becky, that's not something that's not natural. We're always doing that for teachers, but not necessarily for our support staff, right?
Correct.
It's awesome. Okay, so we're going to stay on here for just a minute and answer questions. Becky, that's a great job. Great job on that. I think that there was lots of great information. We want to encourage everyone on this call to reach out to SAS if they have any questions. We're going to provide the slide deck to anyone who registered for this. It'll be in our document library. This webinar will also be in the document library. So thank you to everyone who came live, and thank you also to those of you who are watching on a recording. Becky, well done.
Thanks. Hey, I did see a couple of questions here I was going to answer as far as what we do. One asked, are you starting the budget process for next year at your school? Oh, did you say that?
I said that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There was one here on what was the process for regular review. Oh, you asked that. You're asking great questions.
Well, I was putting out there, and people were commenting, so it's good stuff.
Okay.
But Becky, let me ask you this real quick before we close. Are you willing to, if people have questions for you, are you willing to take emails from them? If so, why don't you go ahead and put your email in the chat for everyone. And you guys, I can't tell you enough. Becky is at the top of her game when it comes to being a business officer. And so I can assure you that she can answer most of your questions. She's really good at her job. So, which is why we ask her to be a leader in this webinar. So
I'd also like to add there, I'd put my email up there. Please email me if you need anything. I'll share our policy documents. I'd love to share anything, but also if you have something that you're extra proud of, that you think is great, that you've implemented in your school that has saved you time, money, angst, please send it my way. I love to learn what other people are doing.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. That's the beauty of Episcopal schools, is we network. So we learn. I always say there is no new idea. Everybody's just recycling, right?
Yep.
So again, thank you so much. We're going to stop the recording. Y'all have a great day.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.